L'kuta Sichis Chelek Chavav Boy Aleph Lili Nishmas of Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. We are also learning L'schos Yehuda Le Ben Mania for a Refuah Shlema Ukreva. We're going to talk about the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh, which is based in this week's parsha. We're going to learn how this mitzvah is actually so fundamental and so integral to the entire Torah and mitzvahs. Seif Aleph. The mitzvah lekadosh chadashim ulachashiv shanim v'chadashim bebezin bilvad. The mitzvah to sanctify the new months and to calculate months and years by bezdin specifically, let it ben up von pasuk hachedesh zelachem reish chadashim rishnu lachem lachashi hashana is learned from the parsha, from the pasuk in this week's parsha, where Hashem tells to Moshe, this month, the month of Nisan, is the beginning of all the months, and it's the beginning of the months of the year, which is the source in Torah to the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh. Mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh, as we'll see in the duration of the Sikha, is number one, that when it came time to proclaim a new month, Bezdin would wait for witnesses who have seen the new moon, and only then would they proclaim the new month. Additionally, Bezdin also had a job to calculate the months of the year, that if Pesach will not be falling out in the spring, to add a month of Adar before Nisan, so that way Pesach should fall out in the spring. As the Torah says, it has to be Chedesh Ha'aviv in the month of spring. So today we're going to talk about this mitzvah. So Parshas Boy is where this mitzvah is taught. Zakt Rashi bePerushim b'Makamacher Lifnei. In an earlier Rashi, which is actually the very first Rashi in Chumash Bereishis, Rashi says b'negiyat der mitzvah as lo haya tzarach lahaschil as haTorah ela me'achedes zelachem. Really, the Torah should have started from Hachedesh Zelachem, Shei Mitzvah Rishayna Shenisava Yisrael, which is the first mitzvah which Yidden were commanded to do. For example, the Rebbe brings in the Ha'ara, there are some mitzvahs mentioned in Chumash Bereishis. That says the mitzvah of Milah to Avram Avinu, but that was given to Avram as an individual. Only later does Moshe Rabbeinu give over this mitzvah to Klal Yisrael in Parshas Tazriah. But the very first mitzvah that the Eibishter gives Klal Yisrael, that is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh in Parshas Boy. And therefore Rashi says that the Torah should have started with this mitzvah. The Torah is a book of mitzvahs, so this mitzvah should have been the first one. When there's Masbir Matam Pasach of Bereshis, and Rashi gives a reason why the Torah starts with Bereshis, which we will mention later in the Sikha. But here, the first point we're making is that Rashi says that there is a reason that mitzvahs Kiddush HaChedesh should have been the first mitzvah. The Torah should have been the beginning of the Torah. But the codifiers of the mitzvahs, such as the Rambam, who list the mitzvahs in their order, is the mitzvah from Kiddush HaChedesh bazeh niti mitzvah rishayna. They do not list the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh first, ubedavke bazeh, and specifically so, as we'll see in a moment. Uladugma, for example, the Rambam zok mitzvah rishayna and mitzvah saseh leida sheyashem elokah. The Rambam says the first mitzvah of all the mitzvahs saseh is to know that there is a God. Shenemar anechi Hashem elokecha. He doesn't say the first mitzvah is to be Mekadosh L'Chedesh. Under Tam derfun is verstandige pastors with a very obvious reason. But the idea of the kiyum from kol mitzvahs is shayach nor noch dem. This is the idea sheyashem elokah, because the knowledge and the ability to fulfill the mitzvahs only becomes possible once you know that there's an Eibishter. Once you know that there's a commander, then you know that you have to fulfill the commandments of the commander. As the Rambam says in the beginning of Hilchas Yesodei HaTorah, which is in the beginning of the Sefer Hamada, Adas Yesodei HaYesodis, Ve'amud HaChachmas, that this is the foundation of all foundations, it's the pillar of all wisdoms. In other words, before you can move anywhere in learning or observing as a Jew, you first have to know that there's a God, which is why the Rambam starts with it. So, what does Rashi mean then, that this is the first mitzvah? Rashi is referring to the fact that in the Torah, this mitzvah is written first. So the Rashi and Rambam are not arguing. Rashi is just saying that Kiddush HaChedesh is the first mitzvah that was written into the Torah. The Rambam is saying that the first mitzvah that a person should observe is not Kiddush HaChedesh. The first mitzvah that a person should observe is the mitzvah of knowing Hashem. Nevertheless, since everything in Torah is precise, so let's realize Everything in Torah is precise. Everything in Torah is exact. If the Torah started with Kiddush HaChedush as the first mitzvah, there must be something to it. And what is it that is to it? So it's very simple. It says, from the perspective of the Gavra, the person observing or fulfilling the mitzvahs, the first mitzvah is to know that there's an Eibishter. There's an mitzvah, as Chazal tell us with regards to the paragraph of Shema versus V'hayim Shemaya, that first you have to accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven, and only then can you accept upon yourself the yoke of mitzvahs, which means first you have to believe in Hashem, or accept Hashem, and then you can accept mitzvahs. So with regards to the Gavra, when you're looking at it the perspective of the person, then the Yediyas Hashem, knowing Hashem is first. Aber wie der Inyan is mitzat Torah und mitzat Chevtze. If you're looking at the from the perspective of Torah, which in this context we're talking as the object in contrast to the person who's fulfilling the Torah, is the mitzvah the first mitzvah, which seemingly should have been with which the Torah began. Weil die Mitzvah hat in sich a Teuchen Ikri v'Yesoidi von Klolos HaTorah v'Mitzvahs. Because this mitzvah has a fundamental theme that is integral to all of Torah mitzvahs. Now the Rebbe is saying that it's true that from one perspective, the first mitzvah is knowing Hashem, but from the fact that the Torah actually the first mitzvah in the Torah is Achedes Zolachem, and Rashi says the whole Torah should have started with that. This tells us that there's also something integral and fundamental with the mitzvah of Kiddush Achedes, which is what we're going to discuss in today's Sikha. V'shleimar, das is Bekama Yonim. The Rebbe is now going to introduce 3 points that with which Kiddush Achedes is so fundamental, and then the Rebbe will explain them all. Aleph, the mitzvah weist dem Eufen von der Sinnes HaTorah. Number 1, the mitzvah shows us the manner in which Torah was given. Beis, sie bringt heraus dem Koyach HaTorah v'Mitzvahs. This mitzvah emphasizes the power of Torah mitzvahs. Gimel, in ihr sagt sich heraus die Matorah v'Tachlis v'Mitzvahs HaTorah. This mitzvah expresses the purpose of the mitzvahs. So you have Eufen, Koyach, and Matorah v'Tachlis. The manner in which Torah was given, the power of Torah, and the purpose of Torah. Kiddush lekamon, as the Rebbe will explain. So, in Sif Aleph, the Rebbe introduces the fact that despite the fact that the Rambam says mitzvah Rishoina is mitzvah of knowing Hashem, nevertheless in the Torah, the first mitzvah is Kiddush HaChedesh, and the reason is because this mitzvah is very fundamental to the rest of Torah in the following 3 things: in the manner of the giving of the Torah, in the power of Torah, and in the purpose of Torah and mitzvahs. Sif Beis. The Even Ezra on our parsha has a question. He says the only reference to Kiddush HaChedesh is this pasuk. Moshe does not spell out to us how the moon should look and how many days the cycle is, and all of the details that are included in this mitzvah. The Torah doesn't tell us anything of it. The Torah just gives us this general thing that there's a mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh. And what happens if it's not spring? Pesach's coming and it's not spring yet. What do? Torah doesn't tell us. Chachamim told it to us, as we'll see. But the Torah doesn't say anything. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't give us this information. Says the Rebbe, says the Even Ezra, this is a major question. When it comes to the various different nigoim, the various different effects of a mitzvah, the Torah goes into the details of the different shades and colors and the different time frames and the different types. And by mitzvah, it affects individuals and only in certain times. And he neglected to give us the information on how to establish the Yamim Tovim, which affects all of Klal Yisrael at all times. Excuse me. If we designated the wrong day for Pesach, and we ended up eating chametz, chas v'shalom, on the day that's actually Pesach, or if we designated the wrong day for Yom Kippur, and we ended up eating chas v'shalom on the day of Yom Kippur, it's the Easter Kares. So these are very fundamental details that are relevant to so much of Yiddishkeit. So how does Moshe not tell us anything about it? Und der Even Ezra is masbir, and the Even Ezra explains, as v'zel ois, this is a sign that Moshe relied on the proclamation of Bezdin in each generation. Das heißt, As from their mitzvah Kiddush HaChedesh is done, that from the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh, there's a very clear proof as Torah b'Pirusha Nitna, that Torah was given with a manual. Torah was given with the commentary of Torah, how to learn it. As Torah Shebal Peh, was the Chachamim Chalderis of Megala given, is Ein Zach B'Torah Shebiksav. And throughout the generations, as Chachamim revealed to us the various different details in the oral Torah, in Torah Shebal Peh, it's not like it was something that was added on later by the Chachamim, but it's one with Torah Shebiksav. You can't learn Torah Shebiksav without Torah Shebal Peh. When the Torah says, Leisavashal Gdiba Chalevima, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk, it doesn't mean that literally. And when the Torah says to put the tefillin between your eyes, it doesn't mean that literally either. How do we know? Because Torah Shebal Peh tells it to us. How do we know that Torah Shebal Peh is the partner, it came together and is one thing with Torah Shebiksav from Kiddush HaChedesh? Because Kiddush HaChedesh, obviously there's many more details, and Moshe didn't tell it to us. Why? Because there's a Torah Shebal Peh that tells it to us. So Kiddush HaChedesh teaches us that Torah was given with a commentary, with a manual of how to understand it. Befratas de Kiyum, von Gourarie Sach Mitzvah Torah v'chazan verbunden mit dem Mitzvah Yashana, is verbunden dafke mit the Kriyas HaChadashim. Especially since there's many mitzvahs that are relevant to the various different festivals of the year, that are dependent on the designation of or the establishment of the months, as the Chachamim established it in Torah Shebal Peh. In other words, we see that there's so many moving parts when it comes to the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh. The fact that Moshe didn't say anything to us about it teaches us that Torah b'Pirusha Nitna. So the Oifen Nisinas HaTorah, which is the first point in the previous if, is Torah b'Pirusha Nitna. Torah Shebal Peh came together with Torah Shebiksav. Sorry, Torah Shebiksav came together with Torah Shebal Peh, or vice versa. And Torah Shebal Peh is one with Torah Shebiksav. Al derech zeh bringt die mitzvah from Kiddush HaChedesh as Torah is balabas Welt. Another point, which is the koyach of Torah, is that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh shows us that Torah is in charge of the world. As we'll see, when Torah gives a psak, it has an effect on the physicality in the physical world and could change something in the nature of the world. With the Maimon Arzala Yadua from Pasuk Akra Lelakim Elyon, Lakel Gomer Eloi, is a very well-known Yerushalmi, which is brought numerous times in the Kutasichis. On this Pasuk Akra Lelakim Elyon, Bash Lashana V'Yimechad, V'Nimlach and Bezdin L'Ebrei, Habesulin Chayzlin, V'Imlav Ein Absulin Chayzlin. The din is that if a young woman loses her besulim, loses her signs of virginity, then once she turns 3 years old, whatever may happen, the besulim, the signs of virginity, do not come back. They don't grow back once the girl is 3. If the girl is not yet 3, then the besulim, the simani besula, they grow back. So the Yerushalmi says like this: what happens if the girl just turned 3? Let's say in the beginning of Adar she turned 3, and after that, for whatever reason, she lost her simani besula, and then so now seemingly she's 3 years old. And the halacha is Ein Psula Chayzrin. The Torah tells us it doesn't come back. But then, at the end of this Adar, Bezdin was Ma'aber the Chaydesh. They added another Adar in order to make sure that Pesach is in the spring. And now she's not 3 anymore. Now she has to wait again till her birthday in the Adar Sheni to become 3. So says the Yerushalmi that if Bezdin was Ma'aber the Chaydesh, then the Psula Chayzrin, her Simone Psula will return because she's not yet 3. And if Bezdin is not Ma'aber the Chaydesh, then since she already turned 3 before she lost her Besulim, so it won't come back. Which means that this physical phenomena, that whether she does have Besulim or doesn't have Besulim, is dependent on whether Bezdin paskins that there's one Adar or 2 Adars. So we see that the psak of Bezdin, the psak of Torah, that comes with the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh, actually has an effect on the physicality of this person in a physical world. When their fire is mitzvah Kiddush HaChedesh, the mitzvah Rishonah Sheshav by Yisrael, and this is why the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh is the first mitzvah. So much so that this should have been the beginning of Torah. Vile, and the Rebbe mentions both points here. Sif Beis and Sif Gimel. Number 1, for near netmen dem Yesod in the Sinas HaTorah, the Amunah in dem Emes from Torah Shebal Peh. Number 1, it teaches us the truth, the veracity of Torah Shebal Peh, that it came together with Torah Shebiksav. Und Eichet dem Tekif HaTorah u'mitzvahs b'chlal. It also teaches us the power of Torah mitzvahs, dem koyach zu mishanas an diteva mitzvahs ha'olam, the power to change in the nature and in the physical world. So we have 2 points. Point number 1 is the way Torah was given, that it was given with Torah Shebal Peh. And number 2, the power of Torah, that Torah has the ability to change the physicality of the world. Before we go to the 3rd point, the Rebbe is going to add another detail here. Based on the fact that in Sif Gimel we said that the Torah is balabas on the world, Torah is in charge of the world. So this will actually answer another question. The Rashi tells us that the reason why the Torah actually begins with Bereshis is to teach us the power of the Eibishter's actions. That he created the world, and therefore when he gives Eretz Yisrael to the Yidden, it belongs to us, and no other nation can come and say it is theirs. But since in the end it should have been Achedes Zelachem, and it ends up being Bereshis Bara, so even though there's a good reason why, but nevertheless, is mistaber zogin as there must be a connection between the two. In other words, you have Achedes Zelachem, which should have been the beginning. You have a Bereshis Bara, which is the beginning, so there must be a connection between them. If this could have been the beginning of Torah, and this is the beginning of Torah, then there must be something that connects them. Now let's move on. But now that we said that one of the things we learned from Kiddush HaChedush is that Torah is balabas on the world, so now we understand the connection between HaChedush Zelachem and Bereshis Bara. Bereshis Bara lekim es Rashi mefarish b'sfilat Torah shenikras Reishis Darkei so Yisrael shenikroim Reishis Tevuasei. Another Rashi on Pasuk Bereshis says, you read it Beis Reishis. There's 2 things that are Reishis. The Torah is called Reishis, and Yidden are called Reishis. And Bereshis Bara means the Eibishter created the world for these 2 Reishis, for the Torah and for Yidden. Und wie bald as the ganze Bria is b'shvilat Torah b'shvil Yisrael, and if entire creation is for Yidden and for Torah, is verstandig is understood as when Bezdin paskin tal Torah as the Chedesh is me'uber. So if Bezdin rules that this Chedesh should be added on to the year, this actually affects the physical world. But in the ganze Bria is b'shafik man shlip Torah v'Yisrael, because the whole world is for Torah and Yidden. In other words, just like if you're doing something for someone, you're going to do it the way they want it to be done, because the whole motivation is that person. So if you're going to do something for someone, you're going to do it the way they want it to be done. So too, since the whole purpose of creation is for Torah, then the world is going to operate according to Torah's psak. So now you see a distinct connection between Achedes Zelachem and Bereshis Bara. Bereshis Bara is Beis Reishis, the fact that the world was created for Torah and for Yidden, and Achedes Zelachem proves where we see in actuality that the Torah, that the world changes itself according to the psak of Torah. Because since the whole purpose of creation is for Torah, so therefore the world creation operates according to Torah. Now the Rebbe is going to introduce the 3rd point, the matara v'tachlis, the purpose of mitzvah Torah as it is seen in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedush. But first the Rebbe asks a question on this previous point, the point of the Koyach HaTorah as seen in Kiddush HaChedush. Das aber nit maspik. If we just had those 2 points that were mentioned, it's still not enough of an explanation why Kiddush HaChedush is a mitzvah rishayna. The fact that when Bezdin adds a month, so the psulim, the simoni psula, the signs of virginity will grow back, is nit in their mitzvah atzma. It's not part of the actual mitzvah. I feel it in the Levana. It's not even happening in the moon, which is what the mitzvah is about. It's actually a side outcome that happens based on the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedush. If we want to explain mitzvah, the lashon mitzvah rishena, when you say that it's the first mitzvah, is mashma as the inyan for Rishayna with the mitzvah, that there's an aspect of Rishayna that relates to the mitzvah itself, as Teichenu Ataras HaMitzvah kumt in dem ba'ad gasha, that the very mitzvah itself emphasizes the fact that it's Rishayna. So it's true that Kiddush HaChedush teaches us the power of a mitzvah, the power of Torah, that when Torah paskins something, it changes the nature of the world, but there has to be more in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedush that emphasizes its Rishayna, the fact that it's the first mitzvah. And that's what the Rebbe is going to explain in the following seifim. Ikir in Yana von Mitzvah Teire ist so oft an Kedusha in Welt, und das ist mit der Kunde von Mitzvah Teire. The primary point of the mitzvahs is to bring holiness into the world. And this is the point of all the mitzvahs. Man nehmt a Chefze von Elam, when man macht von a Chefze shal mitzvah, bis as wird an Ingen von Kedusha, you take a physical object and you turn it into a mitzvah object, and you instill holiness into it. This is true to all mitzvahs, or most mitzvahs. Und das ist der Tegen von Kiddush HaChedesh. And this is the same idea is in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh. The Ruftu was best is Mekadosh HaChefza Yom Mesuyim. Torah takes something, such as a specific day, let's even call it a random day, and Torah and Bezdin sanctifies it, Al Tzorish Chedesh, that it now becomes a Chedesh, Nita Yom HaMaisa, not just a regular work day. The carbon miyuchad, and because of that there is a specific additional carbon that is brought on Rosh Chodesh, bis as v'hayim mit Chodesh b'chatzei, vi u'midei Shabbos b'shvarat yavi v'geimer. So you see how the pasuk compares the holiness of Rosh Chodesh and the holiness of Shabbos, which means that Bezdin has the power to take a regular day and make it into a holy day. The Rambam says, the day that Bezdin sanctifies and designates to be Rosh Chodesh, that's Rosh Chodesh. Rambam says, she'eino re'iyah kevas elo Bezdin, she'amru she'eino re'iyah kevas elo Bezdin, she'amru mekudesh heim shekoivim. It's not the actual sighting of the moon that designates the day. It's Bezdin. When Bezdin says Mekudesh, that's when the day becomes. L'moshel, if the witnesses came late in the day and Bezdin didn't get a chance to speak to them until after it was dark, then that day won't be Rosh Chodesh. The next day will be Rosh Chodesh. So we see that it's not about when just the movement of the moon. It's about the proclamation of Bezdin. Und das ist verbunden mit Kiddush Samayadis, and this now relates to the holiness of the Yomim Tov and the festivals. While you say mitzvahs Kiddush HaChedesh, Kiddush Yasu Yisrael Mayad Yashana B'Mayadam, like it said that the purpose or the foundation of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh is so that the Yomim Tov and the festivals should occur in their proper time. Und der Rebbe Zaken bei Yom Tov Mekadosh Yisrael V'Azman, which is why on Yom Tov in Shemona Esrei and in Kiddush we say Mekadosh Yisrael V'Azman. On Shabbos we say Mekadosh Shabbos. We don't say Mekadosh Yisrael V'Shabbos. So why in Yom Tov do we say Mekadosh Yisrael V'Azmanim? Says the Gemara, Val Yisrael de Kachinu Lizmanim, because Yidden are the ones that sanctify the times. In other words, Kiddush HaChedesh gives the power to a Yid to sanctify the time, not just the day of Rosh Chodesh, but all the Yomim Tovim are sanctified by the Yidden when Bezdin is Mekadosh HaChedesh. V'yishleimar. So now, at this point, Kiddush HaChedesh is like any other mitzvah. All mitzvahs are to take the physical and instill holiness and kedusha into it. And so is Kiddush HaChedesh. It takes a regular day and it instills holiness into it. Now we can explain why it's mitzvah rishayna. Neis v'alzevas the nekuda klolos from all mitzvah teres supel and nachavt says is over nachavt shal mitzvah. Unukuda is begali by the mitzvah kiddush hachedesh. In addition to the fact that every mitzvah is to bring holiness into a physical object, and in Kiddush HaChedesh we see this in a very revealed way. We see how the day was a regular day, and all of a sudden, because Bezdin's proclamation becomes a holy day. But that is a more general point. On a deeper level, Kiddush HaChedesh is considered Rishona because of what Kiddush HaChedesh is, not just because it's sanctifying the day, which is one point, but there's a deeper point. The Rebbe explains like this: Chach together for Elam is beide Sachen, sei Zman und sei Bakim. Though the concept of creation consists of time and space, und Zman is verbunden mit Makim, and time and space are integrated. We operate with both of them together. The typical example is when you say, how fast is someone going? 60 miles an hour, or 30 miles an hour. Miles is Makim. Hour is Zman. But you're basing the makim on you're measuring the makim by this man and this man by the makim, because creation is an integration of both. Is ober, however, if you have to separate time and space and say which one of the two was created first, it kumt zman far makim. Time has to be before space. Anything that you create, even the very creation of space, creation means that it's different now than it was before it was created. So if you're saying that now it's different than before, there's a before, there's an after. If there's a before and an after, there has to be something that creates a structure of before and after. Which is the idea of time. Since you can only create something by making it different than it was before, then you have to have before. Before has to exist before you start, which is the idea of Zman. Das heißt, die erste Metzias von Elam, was von der Metzias fangen sich an alle im Zäum ist man. Which means that the very first thing the Eibishter created is time. And from that, everything else could be created. We want to use a simpler example. You'll see it in a person's life. When a person wakes up in the morning, the first thing he has is the time. He has a new day. He hasn't accomplished anything yet in that day, but he has a day. And once he has the day, now he could fill that day with accomplishments, with makim. But first you have Zman, and then the Zman gets filled with makim. Und der Fahr is Kiddush HaChedesh mitzvah Rishena, and this is why Kiddush HaChedesh is the first mitzvah. Weil früher peilt Beis Din Kedusha in Zman, that's Chalas HaMetzias. Because since Zman is the very beginning of creation, the first thing we have to do is sanctify the Zman. Only then could the person do what he has to do, which he operates with the objects of the world which are in the realm of makim. So now it's very clear, very beautiful. Taka, every mitzvah is about sanctifying the mundane, but the very first thing that the Eibishter created was Zman, and therefore the very first mitzvah is to sanctify this Zman. And then we could sanctify everything else in the context of Zman. So this is the third point. So we had 3 points so far in what is the uftu of Kiddush HaChedesh as mitzvah Rishena. Number 1, the oifen is sinas HaTorah. That Torah came together with Torah Sheba'al Peh. The koyach HaTorah, that you have, the Torah has the power to change the nature of the world, and the matorah v'tachlis, the whole purpose of Torah is to bring holiness into the mundane, and the very first step is Kiddush HaChedesh, which is sanctifying the very first thing that was created, which is time. The Zabar L'Cheren it Maspik, this is not a sufficient explanation yet. The Rebbe is going to expand this answer to a much, much, much bigger scope. But in order to do that, the Rebbe asks a number of questions, which all of them are going to be on the same theme, that there are many aspects to Kiddush HaChedesh that are not directly associated with Kedusha, with sanctifying something. Let's see it inside. The fact that Bezdin is sanctifying the day is not always, doesn't always work that Bezdin does it. Bezdin only has to sanctify if the moon was seen in the time, which means when Rosh Chodesh is b'yom lamed, when Rosh Chodesh is on the 30th day, and you have to do it based on the sighting. So Bezdin says because it's Chodesh. But if nobody saw the moon and the 30th day is finishing, automatically the 31st day becomes Rosh Chodesh, even without Bezdin saying because it can never be the 32nd day. It always, based on the calculation, there's only 29 and a half days in the cycle of the moon, and therefore Rosh Chodesh is always going to be either on day 30 or day 31. So Rosh Chodesh could happen without Bezdin saying B'kudosh HaChodesh, without them saying that they're sanctifying it. Point 1, point 2 in Bezdin, the mitzvah HaChodesh is Nichol Echol L'chasher Shana V'chadashim Bebezdin. Bezdin has another part of their mitzvah is to calculate the years and the months, and if necessary, to add a month to the year to keep the seasons that follow the solar year to be consistent with the lunar year that we are following, that we are using in our calendar. We call it to literally mean to impregnate the year, which means to add something to the year, but it's called Ibur. We're not calling it to sanctify the year. There's no sanctification in the fact that there's an extra Adar. So again, here is something that Bezdin has to do as part of the mitzvah Kiddush HaChedesh, and it's not necessarily called Lekadesh or Kedusha. Gimel leitin Ram mazal achal mishbisinu shvazan shesnedin kevin al piyariya. Man change some said kevin al piyachas ben azah shonim chas ben bayim vin zakin liya. Rambam tells us that Allah mishbisina is that when there is Sanhedrin, then we designate the new month according to the sighting of the moon. But when there is no Sanhedrin, then we designate the months according to the calculations of the calendar, which we use today, and we don't have to depend on the sighting of the moon. Is the fees of the Cheder echt kvius al pia chesed nichel in the mitzvah kiddush hachedesh, which means that the fact that we're designating the months according to the calculations that we're making is part of the mitzvah kiddush hachedesh. Und damit ist man nicht mekadesh, genau, wir beinen kaschen el. And then we're not mekadesh. We don't say mekudesh hachedesh because you can only say mekudesh if the moon was seen. In this case, we're using a calendar that was established almost a couple thousand years ago, and that's what we're using. And it's not a concept of mekudesh because there's no re'iyah. So here you have three areas when Bezdin was in session. If Rosh Chodesh if they didn't see the moon, it would still become Rosh Chodesh on day 31 without Mekudesh HaChodesh. Bezdin had a job to be me'aber the year, to add a month to the year, which is not part of the Kedusha. And also, Bezdin has, we have a job to follow a calendar that is not based on the Iyah. Again, it's part of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, but it's not part of the Kedusha of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. So basically the question is, how do you say that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is being Mekadesh this man if there's so many elements to it that are not really the idea of Kedusha? The Rebbe is going to bring some nuances in the Rambam, and based on that, the Rebbe is going to explain to us what the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is, and then we'll understand why the Rambam, why even if it's not called Mekadesh HaMekudesh HaChodesh, or it's not called Kiddush HaChodesh, it still is in that part of that realm and accomplishes the idea of being Mekadesh this man. But we have to take one step at a time. Sif Zayin. Wenn das Verstehen beachtet, was der Rambam wird, wenn rechnet die Mitzvah, in Minyan HaMitzvahs, sagt den Lashon Kanal, Lekadesh Chadashim und Lechashev Shanim V'Chadashim. Let me just clarify like this. When the Rabbi wrote his Chibur, his Yad HaChazaka, the 14 volumes of Mishnah Torah, the very beginning of that Chibur, it's actually in the beginning of Sefer Hamada, the Rambam has Minyan HaMitzvahs. The Rambam lists all the mitzvahs, just one line of each mitzvah. Do this, shenemar this, do this, shenemar this, and that's it. Then, when it comes to the halachas, so the Rambam will say, let's say, for example, Hilchas Kiddush HaChodesh. He will then say what the mitzvah is, in a line, and then you have all the halachas and all the details. So you have Minyan HaMitzvahs, then you have the description of the mitzvah that comes at the beginning of the halachas, then you have the halachas. So now, in Minyan HaMitzvahs, the Rambam says, what's the mitzvah? Lekadesh Chadashim, to sanctify the months, ulechashev shanim v'chadashim, and to calculate months and years. Aber in the halachas gufa, sagt b'tchilas hilchas kiddush hachedesh. When it comes to the halachas itself, at the very beginning he says mitzvah sasei achas is one mitzvah. V'hi lechashev v'leida v'legbeya be'ezeh yom tchilas kol chedesh b'chatzei hashana. To calculate, to note, and to designate, establish which day is the beginning of every day of which day is the beginning of every month. Notice there's no mention of the word lekadesh or anything like that. So too, when you go inside the breadth of the halachas, the Rambam writes, there's a mitzvah from the Torah upon Bezdin, sheyechashvu v'yedu, they should calculate, they should know, will the moon be seen or not? Und sagt nicht, as the Teichif when the mitzvah is Lekadesh HaChodesh, and the Rambam does not say Lekadesh HaChodesh. In other words, he focuses more on the practical, which is the calculating and the designating, and not so much on the sanctification. The Tam B'Parshas Terfun is. The simple reason is, weil euch das, was mit Kevei HaChadashim Abram Shana Al Pei Chesed, is nichla let nam, and the mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh. The fact that we're designating months and we are adding months to the year according to the calculations that we were given is actually according to the Rambam part of the mitzvah. Not just the fact to designate the the new month, and to sanctify it by the Sanhedrin when they saw the new moon. There's much more to the mitzvah, and that's what the Rambam says. In the beginning he says Lekadesh, which is one of the aspects of it. But later when he goes into the details, he doesn't mention the Lekadesh because there's many other details as well. But Asbara says the Rebbe, this doesn't sufficiently explain this. For was sagt bloß dem Minyan in the mitzvah say lechashe v'leida v'legbeya beizim mit chiddush chadesh und is nit keilel in the mitzvah echt Minyan for kiddush chadesh. Was is mit kivei and mekadesh al piyar. Why does the Rambam not mention kiddush? Now the fact that the Rambam mentions other things, we understand, because the Rambam wants to say the mitzvah of kiddush chadesh is a broader mitzvah. It's not just to be mekadesh the chadesh. It's also to be ma'aber the year and to have new months without the bezdin. But why does the Rambam not mention the Kaddish HaChedesh at all when it comes to the actual halachas? This is the Rebbe's question on the Rambam. We understand that there are more details. We mentioned it in the questions. But the question is, why in the Rambam, when he discusses the mitzvah, what is the mitzvah saseh of Kiddush HaChedesh, he does not mention the Lekadish at all. And here the Rebbe gives a beer. And the Nekudas HaBir is going to be that it's not just when we do a mitzvah that we're sanctifying the object of the mitzvah, but that there's many components that lead up to the ability to do this mitzvah, and all of those components become sanctified, become elevated, become holy when a yid does a mitzvah. The entire creation is for Torah and for Yidden, like we mentioned before from Rashi. In every aspect of creation, heaven and earth and everything in between. Not just the original creation, but the fact that the Eibishter is consistently creating every aspect of the world is for Torah and for Yidden. Und die Avede von Eiden besteht in dem, was da bringen bepeil megale sein des Torah bis Yisrael in der Bria. And the task of the Jew is to reveal in the world that it's being created for Torah and for Yidden. Und wenn Aid is when a yid uses a worldly object to do a mitzvah, this carries out the purpose. The purpose of the creation of that specific thing, that she was created for Torah and for Yidden, and that's becoming a mitzvah object. For example, when a yid takes the hide of an animal and makes it into parchment for sefer Torah for tefillin mezuzos, this carries out the purpose of the creation of the hide as vert from dem klav achef to the Torah begali. The parchment, the hide, becomes a revealed Torah object. Now, as and since, as we said earlier, time is also created, is move on as so it's understood that also the creation of time is for Torah and for Yidden. And that's the inner theme of this mitzvah. When Yidden sanctify the months by making Rish Chedesh or making Yom Tevim, they're revealing that the whole purpose of time is for Torah and for Yidden. There's a pasuk in Tehillim, and the way we are understanding it, why did Hashem create the moon? So we should be able to know when Yom Tov is. So we see that everything that the Eibishter created is b'shvil Torah, b'shvil Yisrael. When a Yid does a mitzvah with something, it's revealed how its creation was b'shvil Torah, b'shvil Yisrael. And so too, when it comes to the creation of Zman, when a Yid is Mekadesh HaChedesh, or Yidin, or Mekadesh HaChedesh, they reveal that the creation of Zman was b'shvil Torah, b'shvil Yisrael. It was so Yidin should come with Torah and sanctify it. And just like you're going to say this with regards to the rest of creation, as the kavana is need blaze in the achefetz mesuyim as an imzol sich durchführen mataras b'riyasei. It's not just the specific object that's being used for the mitzvah, that by using it for the mitzvah you are fulfilling the purpose of its creation. No, the kavana is as dozol ufton or der meises eine der ganze bria. The purpose is to change something and to enhance all of creation, and all the aspects of creation. But does vet al yedei was jede Zach in der Brie helft daruis und is meis veiden b'vidasei. How does the entire creation become elevated by the fulfillment of a mitzvah? Because everything in creation helps for the yid to do the mitzvah. And those teltzach and kamadargis, which can be seen in various and multiple layers, machshirei mitzvah, those things that help and prepare the mitzvah, machshir, lim machshir, then the things that help prepare to make something to be able to prepare the mitzvah. The example that Rabbi gives in the Ha'ara is with regards to Hilchas Shabbos, that we know that if a bris is on time, doing the bris is Deicha Shabbos, even though injuring someone is Asr on Shabbos. It's also every day, but the injuring, even if it's for healing, if it's obviously depending on pikuach nefesh or not. The idea of a choivel, of a chabala, is also on Shabbos, but for a bris milah, it's mutter. What happens if a person doesn't have a knife? The knife is called a machshirei mitzvah. It's a tool that helps him do the mitzvah. So the halacha is you're allowed to carry a knife from wherever it is in Rishus Rabim to bring it to the place of the bris, so that way you could do the mitzvah. What happens if a person doesn't have a knife? So the Gemara says a person is allowed to make a fire to fashion a knife out of metal in the fire. That's called machshir limachshir. You're creating a fire to make a knife to do a bris. But the same thing is true in every single mitzvah. You have, let's say, Rabbi used an example of tefillin. So you have to have the hide of the animal, but you also have to have the animal. You also have to have the chalif, the knife that shechted the animal. You also have to have the person, and you also have to have the tools that it needs to feed the animals. So the animals will be healthy. It goes on and on. In order to get to a certain mitzvah, there are millions of components of creation that are all connected to the fulfillment of this mitzvah. So just like we say with regards to all aspects of creation, that they're all involved, they're all being elevated, because they're all in somewhat supporting the mitzvah, and that way they become elevated by it. So too, and even more so, is with regards to time, as the Ashlamas Mataras Abriya from the Chatzei Hashana is nit blois bozebas mis mekiveo mechakadosh dem neshchedes of the Meyadei Hashana. To fulfill the purpose of creation and to sanctify time is not just when we designate Rosh Chodesh or Yontif on a certain day, and that day becomes holy. Thus, is Yomim Misyonim B'Chedesh, certain days of the month will be holy, and that's how we're being Mekadosh Zman. That is not the case. Nor when es wird erhört dem ganzen Hemshech Hazman, Eich le'achrei Rosh Chodesh, then b'shilatir b'shvil Yisrael. If you're able to instill into the whole continuum of time, even after Rosh Chodesh and even after Yom Tov, that the whole creation of time is for Torah and for Yidden, that's how you elevate time. Und das ist durch dem, was bestens bekannt mit Sassei, lechashe v'leida v'ligboya be'eze yem tchilis kochetz v'chatzei hashana. How do you do this? When Bezdin calculates time, when Bezdin learns astronomy, and Bezdin learns the cycles of the sun and the moon, and when Bezdin learns the math, and Bezdin utilizes this every single day to learn and to understand how the moon moves and how the system works. So they're doing this mitzvah every day. They're being mekadosh zman every single day. When Bezdin has to know all the different calculations. They have to know where the stars are, where the moon is. They have to know so many details. All this that Bezdin is learning and calculating the path of the moon, etc. Every day they're being mekadosh zman. This is the chiddush of the second part of the sikha. That it's not just that we're sanctifying time when we designate a day as Rosh Chodesh. When Bezdin fulfills their mitzvah to calculate time every single day, then the whole continuum of time is being elevated, even on the simple days between Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov, and between Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Chodesh. The whole zman is being elevated. Das heißt, neisvav der Peule in dem Zman von Chatzei Hashana durch der Kvias v'Kiddush Rosh Chodesh, eich sheliv di meyades, in addition to the effect on Zman of the months of the year, by designating Rosh Chodesh in order for the Yomim Tevim, was then we finish the Zman Shemitayim Blaze v'Yamein Hechshut Kiddush Zman from the meyades, which if you look at that way, if you see that the whole purpose of counting and calculating is just to know when Yom Tov is, then all the other days are just a preparation to the holiness of the Yom Tevim. Because in order to know when Yom Tov is, in order to know when Rosh Chodesh is, you have to keep track of all the days. So Rebbe says that's not the sum total of it. In addition to the fact that Bezdin are calculating the other days in order to know which day is Rosh Chodesh, in order to know which day is Yom Tov, which means that would mean that the other days are a preparation to the actual holy days. Is nachmer, it actually goes further than that. That etzem cheshbon, was Bezdin yechashvu v'yedem yerech, the very calculation that Bezdin's making. Will we see the moon? Will we not see the moon? Das is which they're doing every single day. Every single day they have to know where will it be seen, where will it be seen, etc. The calculation that's happening on a daily basis is part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah say is not nur the mekadosh and the tag von der Chedesh. No, the yachshu v'yedu. It's not just the sanctification. The calculation of it is the mitzvah. As in the ganzen Hamshach Hazman Gufa, in the entire continuum of time, steht begoled Yisrael, it is seen in a revealed way that time was created for Torah for Yidden. So the Rebbe is answering the question on the Rambam. Why does the Rambam not say L'Kadosh HaChedesh? Because had he said L'Kadosh HaChedesh, one would think that the main mitzvah is to make Rish Chedesh, and all the calculations are being done for the purpose of knowing when's Rish Chedesh, or when Yontif is. The Rambam wants to tell you that the mitzvah on Bezdin is not just to calculate to know when Rish Chedesh is, but the calculation that is being done every day is part of the mitzvah. And therefore, every single day is holy when Bezdin does their mitzvah. Not just Rish Chedesh and Yontif is holy. Every single day has a kedusha in it because every single day Bezdin is doing a mitzvah in Torah, a mitzvah that the Torah gave them. And that's why the Rambam skips the word L'Kadosh HaChedesh. It skips. He doesn't use the term L'Kadosh to emphasize that the mitzvah is much bigger. It's not just about sanctifying specific days of the month. It's about sanctifying the entire continuum of time, even random days of the month. Okay. Now we'll have a deeper understanding in Mitzvah Rishayna. In other words, we said before Mitzvah Rishayna, why? Because man was created first. Since we're sanctifying Zman first, so therefore it's first mitzvah, now we're going to go into understand it a little bit deeper. For this reason, Mitzvah Kiddush HaChedesh is the first mitzvah. The fact that the Eibusha created the world for Torah and for Yidden is not always seen so openly. You have certain objects that they themselves become holy. A Torah, tefillin, for example. Then you have things that you use for the mitzvah. A tefillin zekel. A bag that you keep your tefillin in. There's certain halachas about not using it for mundane things. You can't turn it into a wallet because it's tashmish mitzvah. But it's not a mitzvah itself. It's just serving the mitzvah. Then you could have a yid who's eating breakfast, but he's eating breakfast is not the breakfast isn't holy, but he's eating breakfast in order to serve Hashem. Then you, like we said before, there are certain things that it's just a knife. It's not an actual mitzvah. It's not even a chayfetz mitzvah. Or sometimes you have something else. You have the case of the knife, or the thing that sharpens the knife, or whatever it might be. Things that make in each mitzvah the things that prepare the preparer. See noch weiter, or some things are even further. That are you have something that in order to do the mitzvah, I had to drive my car. In order to have a car, I had to have someone to build the engine. In order to build the engine, I had to get a piece from China. So the person in China has no idea that the piece that he's building, that is going to be shipped to wherever, to going to build a car, and that car is going to be driven to do a mitzvah, that thing is a chelik of the mitzvah. It's very, very far. And in a revealed way, you don't see any connection between this thing and the Torah or a Yid. It's just that when you, the furthest extent is that if you're doing something within a certain species, then that entire species gets elevated by that, and the Rebbe explains that in the brackets. In Masbir, in Tanya, when you brought a carbon with one animal, it elevated the entire livestock species. When you brought one mincha, one flower offering, it elevated the entire vegetation world. You see this even more in Tzedakah. When a person gives a fifth of his earnings to tzedakah, it elevates all the other 4/5 that they too should be considered a dwelling place for Hashem. In other words, certain things you didn't actually do a mitzvah with it, but they're related to something that you did a mitzvah with it, and therefore it gets elevated. So when it comes to objects, when it comes to other things that are being elevated because they are related to the mitzvah, not always do you see the direct connection between that and the mitzvah. In Zman Hana'alober, by Shteti Mitzvahs Kiddush HaChedesh, in them was Bezdin dar v'lechashe v'leida v'legveya be'eze yem tchilas kol Chedesh v'lichat she'ashana. Die Mitzvah und die Peule von Iden Bezdin is in dem ganzen Zman HaChedesh Beifin Yashar. The Mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh is a mitzvah where the entire time Bezdin is learning and calculating. The entire time Bezdin is doing the mitzvah. It's not just that Bezdin is doing certain things in order to do other things. Bezdin is actually constantly doing this mitzvah every single day. They're elevating every single day, not just because they need it for a different day, but that day itself is elevated. Every component of this man is being elevated when Bezdin is calculating the months and the years. And therefore, that's why it's mitzvah rishona. Because mitzvah kiddush hachedesh shows us the idea, besides the fact that Zman is the first thing that was created, and therefore it's sanctifying the first creation. In addition to that, Zman shows us that even something that's not in itself inherently holy is still elevated because of its connection, because a mitzvah is being done with it. And therefore, from this we learn that even things that are very far and you don't see in a revealed way how it relates to the mitzvah. Nevertheless, when a yid does a mitzvah with its counterpart, with the finished product, it affects all of the other stages that led to it. Where do you know that from? From Kiddush HaChedesh. Okay. So Ad Kan is the answer, or the expanded answer to the question why Kiddush HaChedesh is Rishona. There's the Kayach, there's the Eifenis Sinas HaTeira, Teira B'Perusha Nitna. There's the Kayach HaTeira, the Teira is Balabas over the world. There is the Mataras V'Tachlis HaMitzvah, that the whole purpose is to inject holiness into the world. And we see that by Kiddush HaChedesh, which is the first aspect of creation, Zman. And when we instill holiness into it, we show how everything in the world could be instilled with holiness. Then the Rebbe expanded on that and said, it's not just when you're actually doing the Kiddush HaChedesh. Even all of the process that goes in between the actual Kiddush HaChedesh is also specifically a mitzvah, like the Rambam says, l'chashev v'leida v'legboya, and therefore Bezdin is constantly doing the mitzvah, even when you don't see any Kiddusha happening. Nevertheless, the Bezdin is doing a mitzvah, and this teaches us that in every component of creation that has a relation to a mitzvah, even if you can't see it, is being elevated and revealing the fact, B'shvil HaTeira, B'shvil Yisrael, that the whole creation is for Teira and for Yidden. Based on this, the Rebbe is going to explain another. So Ad Kan is the explanation. But once we got to this point and we realize what the Rambam is saying, is that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh is every single day of the year. The Bezdin is in every part of the calculation. Bezdin is elevating Zman by doing this mitzvah. This will actually explain another detail in Rambam. We can explain a diuk in the Rambam. Rambam says, the years that we calculate are solar years. Like we see, the pasuk says to watch, to make sure to follow the month of spring. In other words, the Rambam says that the moon has no years and the sun has no months. In other words, a solar year is just taking the cycle of the sun and breaking it into 12 pieces. The lunar year is just taking 12 lunar cycles and multiplying them and putting them together. Because the cycle of the moon is 29 and a half days. The cycle of the sun is 365 days. So the Rambam says that we have to calculate the sun as well. The Pirush HaPasuk Bazeh is, the simple meaning of this Rambam is as follows. In a connection to what the Rambam said at the beginning, that the months of the year follow the lunar cycle. So says which means to say that a month in the Jewish calendar is not a 12th of the solar year, nor but a month is a lunar cycle, which consists of approximately 29 and a half days. So the Rambam says at the beginning we should count our months according to the moon. The Rambam continues. This is how this is the simple understanding of the Rambam. As we became, since Pesach must be in the spring, and the seasons of the year follow the solar year, not the lunar year. And a solar year is approximately 11 days longer than the lunar year. We also have to count the years on the solar cycle. And therefore Bezdin has to add a month every 2-3 years. As the Rambam will explain in the next halacha. As the Rambam explains later on, That the reason why we add months every once in a while is so that our years should be consistent also with the solar year. That it shouldn't just be every 12 lunar months we start a new year, which but we have to keep it consistent with the solar year. So that's the chayr what the Rambam is saying, is that even though our calendar operates on the lunar cycle, nevertheless we have to also keep track of the solar cycle. From Pashtas Lashon Rambam is aber mashma. This is not to live the way the Rambam says it, that the years that we calculate are solar years. It seems to imply that it's not just because of the yontiv. As Pesach Zayim is man the Pesach should be in the spring. Ubefrat does their mantra bechladet in der halacha. The Rambam doesn't mention Pesach at all. Break nor dem Chelek pasuk shmar mes chedesh aviv. He only brings the part of the pasuk that says the month of spring. He doesn't even say the Pesach. So it's mashma from the Rambam, nor dos is a din in the shana b'chlal, as Solzain Shnei Chama. That there's a din in the year, that the years should be solar years. Norman learned this up we're learning it from the pasuk Chedesh Aviv. But the Rebbe is saying that even though you're going to want to teach, that the Rambam means that our year is a lunar year, but we also have to be consistent with the solar year. The way the Rambam writes it, implies that there is an inherent value to calculating the solar year. Yes, we have to understand. Even though the way our system works, that the 19-year cycle, today's calendar that was established by Hillel Hasheni, is made up of 19 years, and every 19 years the cycle starts over again. So even though that cycle works according to the solar year as well, because we keep on adding an extra month of Adar every once in a while, every 2-3 years. And every 19 years, the solar cycle and the lunar cycle, they match up almost exactly, besides for 1 hour and 485 chalakim, but which is a very small amount. But other than that, they match up almost exactly. So even though we are working with a solar cycle as well, but when we look at our years from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, we're not using the solar cycle of 365 days. Our year is made up of 12 lunar months. Shin Nun Daled Yom, which is 344 days, sometimes 345, or the Dreitzen Chatzei Alvana, or if there's an Ibri, are 13 months, Shin Pei Gimel Yom, 383 days. So the Rebbe is saying, what does the Rambam mean that we're counting solar years? What does that mean? Our years are not solar years, our years are lunar years. We count 12 lunar months or 13 lunar months, and that's our year. So what does the Rambam mean? In other words, the Pashtus Lashon of the Rambam is that he's saying that we should just keep track of the solar cycle to make sure Pesach is in the spring. But the way that Rambam writes it, when the years that we calculate are solar years, implies that the years that we're using, the years that we're working with, are solar years, which is not the fact. So the Rebbe says, but based on what we said till now, we can answer this question: what does the Rambam mean? Since the purpose of Kiddush HaChedesh is to reveal that the whole purpose of the creation of time is for Torah and Yidden, that means that time should become a Torah reality. Is moving as the Rambam is madgis v'ashanim shonim v'chasmin shnei chama. Now we can understand what the Rambam means that with the years that we calculate our solar years. Well, the kavon is peilen durch der mitzvah yeten prat von zman, because the purpose of this mitzvah, as we explained, is to affect every component of time. That it should become elevated, it should become part of the mitzvah. Not in dem chelek von zman von chedes was it from the mitzvah v'alavana. Not only should we focus on the month which is connected with the cycle of the moon, nor euch in dem Zman von Shana, was is verbunden mit Siva v'chama, warum ein levana Shana klal, but also when we calculate the year, which a year, the concept of year is solar, because there isn't really a lunar year. A lunar year is just 12 lunar months. But when you talk about Shana, the concept of a year-long cycle is a Shnas Achama, is a solar cycle. So in order to calculate and bring on all components of Zman into this mitzvah, you have to count you have to involve every aspect of Zman. But as it blaze up, so it's not enough to count the seasons, to calculate the seasons solely for the purpose of Nisan and Pesach being in the spring, which would only be a minor detail in the overall year. There's man from Shana Gufa, Udekula, the whole concept of Shana has to become a Teredik existence. Because only then he reaches the purpose of his creation. And this is when Bezdin calculates the solar year. So the Rebbe is saying something absolutely incredible here. The Rebbe is saying that even though we don't really need to calculate the solar year in middle of Cheshvan, there isn't really a practical purpose in that time. But when Bezdin includes the calculation of Shana, which Shana is a solar year, in their calculations, they are fulfilling the mitzvah of L'chashev, V'leida, V'ligboya. And because of that, they're elevating that component of time. Also, the component of Shana, of year, is also being elevated because Bezdin is doing a mitzvah with it. And therefore, we actually find certain dinim that are actually related to the number of the days of the year, of the solar year. For Shin Samachayim 365. One example that Rebbe brings is Keteris. Nasis, when Yad Yar and Al Yaran, Shin Samachayimana Kenegim Esachama. The Keteris was made in the beginning of the year. It was divided into 365 portions for the 365 days of the year. And even though when it came to the end of the actual year, of the Jewish year, which was 354 days later, they now had 11 portions or 10 portions that was extra, and they had to redeem it and bring it back into the mundane realm. But nevertheless, there was still a system in which we were using Shnei Achama because we want to include Yemei Shnei Achama, the days of the solar year, into a mitzvah and into a purpose. And in order to do Shin Samachayim, in order to know when the year ends, to be able to redeem the leftovers and start again for the new year, you have to count the days of the month, the days of the solar year. So now that we understand that Bezdin's sanctifying time is not just on Rosh Chodesh and on Pesach, but it's actually in every day of the year. It's also in every component of Zman, in days, in months, in years. Where do we do years? Years are solar. And therefore, Bezdin's job is in every component of time, in order to elevate that component of time as well, and to show it, and that it's the purpose of its creation, and to bring it to its purpose. Now let's move in the kesher zwischen Pasach und Reishis Kech meist wegen Lame. Das heißt beim Nachas Goyim, der Chizes Lechem Shim Mitzvah Shena, Shenes Hava by Yisrael, Ukinal Siv Gimel, die 2 Yonim, aber Nashayches is now, earlier in Siv Gimel, we asked the question, what's the connection between Bereishis Bara, which is how Torah actually starts, and Achedus Lechem, which is how Torah should have started. And we said over there, in Siv Gimel, we said that Bereishis Bara tells us B'shvil Torah u'B'shvil Yisrael, and that explains why Torah is balabas in the world, because since the world was created for Torah, therefore Torah is in charge of the world. So now the Rebbe is going to elaborate on that. The idea that the Eibishter is relating his power, the power of his deeds, to be able to give Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people. So the whole purpose of why Torah actually starts with Bereishis Bara is for the purpose of conquering Eretz Yisrael, taking ownership of Eretz Yisrael. Is Meramis weist euch auf dem Kivshua Kibbutz von Gas Mitzrayim. The ownership of Eretz Yisrael represents, or it alludes to, the ownership of the physicality of the world. Iden nemen sie ein, Yidden conquer the physical world, umachen der von Kedusha, and make it holy. Al derech Eretz Yisrael Eretz HaKodesh, just like they took a land and they made it holy. The says some shachas HaKedusha in Makim. The idea of the Kivshua, the idea of Kibbutz Eretz Yisrael, the idea of Bereishis Bara, is about sanctifying the space, taking the space of the world and elevating it. Und das ist der Kesher zum Teichen ha'ini von Achedes Lechem. And this is the connection with Achedes Lechem. Was in Yoni is the Amshachas HaKdusha in Zman. Achedes Lechem, as we explained at length in the Sikha, is about bringing holiness into Zman, into time. As Afal Piva Zman is Achelik von der Bria, Beifen as Meken Emnit Machen Lenger der Kitzer, even though time is just a component of creation, and you can't make it longer or shorter. Und Shayich Bigidarav Avar Haiva Ba'asim Shavat Alamin, and it remains in its ramifications, it remains in its structure, past, present, and future, equally to everyone. You can't say that I have more time than you have, etc. Nevertheless, Yidden could use this man, this component of creation, and turn it into an object of Teiro mitzvahs. And not only the lunar months, which Yidden count, okay, according to the month, because Yidden are compared to the moon, because the moon is smaller than the sun, and Yidden are smaller than the rest of their numbers are smaller than the rest of the world. Not just the parts that are directly connected with the Yom Tovim, but also the month, the solar years. Which are more connected to the nations of the world who calculate their years according to the solar calendar. That Yidden transformed, that when we calculate it, we're calculating solar years and elevating it. This becomes a Jewish man. In so too, there is also a concept of makim, of bringing kedusha into makim. So that's Achedes Lechem is the kedusha of zman, and Bereishis Bara is a kedusha of makim. And that's the connection between the two. They both represent the idea of bringing holiness into the mundane. Achedes Lechem in the realm of time, in every individual aspect of time, down to the calendar that the Goyim use. And nevertheless, we also use it, we also calculate it in order to elevate it. And then you have Makim. We're Kavish Eretz Yisrael, we're Kavish the world, we're Kavish every aspect of the physical space of this world to elevate it to holiness. And through the avodah of conquering the land and conquering the time, we hasten the time that the conquering Eretz Yisrael should be in a literal sense. Mashiach comes and he will gather the forlorn of the Jewish people. That then when Mashiach comes, he will bring back Shivtayich, which is Torah as it was. Once again, they will be calculating and designating months and adding on and expanding the years by the sightings of the moon. Take from his Beliskas Agazis, Shalyada Mizbeach, and this will be done by the Sanhedrin, which their place and their strength is in the Lishkas Agazis, which is right near the Mizbeach, Beis Hamikdash Be'eretz Yisrael, B'meheira V'yameinu Mamish, which is in the Beis Hamikdash in Eretz Yisrael, B'meheira V'yameinu Mamish. So this was a fascinating journey in starting out with a mitzvah of Kiddush HaChedesh, which might seem to it's just another mitzvah. One that, for many of us, is difficult to truly learn because there's so many various details in the mathematics and the astronomy, etc., etc. And ultimately, the Rebbe turns it into the most fundamental mitzvah of the Torah. It shows the oifenis in the Torah, that it shows the kayach HaTorah. It teaches us the purpose is to elevate the physical world and even to elevate zman, and not just to elevate the actual zman that we need, but to elevate every component of zman and to elevate every component of makim until we transform the world and bring Mashiach.